Hello, friends. If you want to watch super hit movie Beetlejuice in English, then you must like this video. If you are visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Friends, in today's video, the movie we are going to talk about is called Beetlejuice. We will talk about what this movie is and where you can watch it all. The interesting facts about this movie. In today's video, I am going to tell you. I am also going to give you all the information on which op platform or on which satellite channel you will get to watch this movie. Also, we will talk in detail about the technical department, music department, pre-production filming, post-production budget box office collection of this film. We will also talk about the story of this film, and I will also give you a small review of the story of this film. Apart from this, we will discuss about the facts of this film's storyline, starcast actors' performance in the film, and which character has played which role. That's why I request you friends to watch this video till the end, so let's start the video. Beetlejuice gets off to a start that's so charming it never lives it down. The movie is all anticlimax once we realize it's going to be about gimmicks, not characters. During the enchanted opening minutes of the film, we meet a young married couple who have just moved into a strange new house, and we're introduced to some of the local townspeople. All of these characters have an offhand, unforced innocence, and no wonder. The movie was directed by Tim Burton, who created a similar feeling in Pee-wee's Big Adventure. It's hard to describe what makes the opening scenes so special. Alec Baldwin and Geena Davis, as the young couple, seem so giddy, so heedlessly in love, that they project an infectious good cheer. The local folks are so gosh darn down home they must have been sired by L.L. Bean out of the Prairie Home Companion. The movie is bathed in a foolish charm, and, fool that I am, I expected that note to be carried all the way through the film. But it was not to be. The young couple die in a silly accident, but they still live in the same house. The only problem is there's nothing outside the door except for a strange science fiction landscape that looks borrowed from Paul Schrader's Cat People. It takes them a while to figure out they're dead, and even longer to realize what has happened. Their fate is to remain in their former home as ghosts, while it is sold to a New York family, Jeffrey Jones and Catherine O'Hara, with Winona Ryder as their daughter. The New Yorkers have big plans for remodeling the haunted house. This is all, I guess, a fairly clever idea, and the movie is well played, especially by Davis, the girlfriend in The Fly, and Jones, the emperor in Amadeus, and the obnoxious principal in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. But the story, which seemed so original, turns into a sitcom fueled by lots of special effects and weird sets and props, and the inspiration is gone. To be sure, there has never before been a movie afterworld quite like this. Heaven, or whatever it is, seems a lot like a cruise ship with a cranky crew. The newly deads find a manual which instructs them on how to live as ghosts, and they also find an advertisement from a character named Beetlejuice, Michael Keaton, who specializes in exorcisms of the living. They enlist him to try to scare the New Yorkers out of the house, but he turns out to be a cantankerous demon, more trouble than he's worth. The best thing about Beetlejuice, apart from its opening, is the set design by Bo Welch. Both Welch and Burton seem inspired by the spirit of Pee-wee's Playhouse and Pee-wee's Big Adventure, in which objects can have lives of their own and architectural details have an unsettling way of rearranging themselves. The look of the film might be described as cartoon surrealistic, but the film's dramatic method isn't nearly as original. One of the problems is Keaton as the exorcist. Nearly unrecognizable behind pounds of makeup, he prances around playing Beetlejuice as a mischievous and vindictive prankster. But his scenes don't seem to fit with the other action, and his appearances are mostly a nuisance. It's also a shame that Baldwin and Davis, as the ghosts, have to spend most of their time playing tricks on Jones and O'Hara and winning the sympathy of their daughter. I would have been more interested if the screenplay had preserved their sweet romanticism and cut back on the slapstick. Beetlejuice is a 1988 American Gothic dark fantasy comedy horror film directed by Tim Burton from a screenplay by Michael McDowell and Warren Scarron, based on a story by McDowell and Larry Wilson. The film stars Alec Baldwin, Geena Davis, Jeffrey Jones, Catherine O'Hara, Winona Ryder, and Michael Keaton as the title character. The first installment of the Beetlejuice franchise, the plot revolves around a recently deceased couple. As ghosts, they are not allowed to leave their house. They contact Beetlejuice, a sleazy bio-exorcist, to scare the house's new inhabitants away. The film prominently features music from Harry Belafonte's albums Calypso and Jump Up Calypso. Beetlejuice was released in the United States on March 30th, 1988 by Warner Bros. The film was a critical and commercial success, grossing $84 million on a $15 million budget. It won the Academy Award for Best Makeup and 3 Saturn Awards, Best Horror Film, Best Makeup, and Best Supporting Actress for Sylvia Sidney. The film's success spawned an animated television series, video games, and a 2018 stage musical. A sequel, Beetlejuice, had its theatrical release on September 6, 2024. Plot: in Winter River, Connecticut, Adam and Barbara Maitland spend their vacation decorating their large country home that family member and local real estate agent, Jane Butterfield, constantly pesters them to sell. Adam spends his off time in the attic working on his hobby, building a scale model of the town. Adam tells Barbara he needs items from the hardware store they operate in town, now closed for their vacation, and she offers to accompany him. Adam collects the items, but on the drive home, the Maitlands' car swerves to miss a dog and plunges off a bridge into the river. Barbara and Adam arrive home, but are unable to recall how they arrived. When attempting to leave the house, Adam enters an otherworldly, desert-like landscape populated by enormous sandworms. The encounter lasts mere seconds for him, but after Barbara rescues him, she claims he had been gone for 2 hours. After discovering a handbook for the recently deceased and noticing they have no reflections in a mirror, the couple deduce they died in the accident and are now ghosts. The house is sold to New York real estate developer Charles Dietz and his second wife Delia, a sculptor of questionable talent. Charles's teenage goth daughter Lydia lives with them. Under the guidance of interior designer Otho, Delia begins renovating the house with a new wave aesthetic of postmodern art. While consulting the handbook on how to remove the Dietzes from their home, the Maitlands see an advertisement on their attic television advertising the bio-exorcism services of a black-eyed, green-haired entity named Beetlejuice. Following the handbook's guidelines, they travel to an otherworldly bureaucratic waiting room filled with other distressed souls. After navigating the afterlife's complex bureaucracy, the Maitlands return home only to realize 3 months have passed and the house has now been completely redesigned. Their caseworker, Juno, arrives and discloses the Maitlands must remain in their house for 125 years before moving on. She strongly urges them to scare the Dietzes out of the house themselves without getting Beetlejuice involved, revealing that he was her assistant before going into business for himself as a freelance bio-exorcist. Adam and Barbara's continued invisibility to Charles and Delia thwarts their fright attempts. Lydia, however, can see them, which she attributes to her peculiar nature. In frustration, the Maitlands end up summoning Beetlejuice and instantly find themselves transported into the model, where they meet him. Adam and Barbara find Beetlejuice's crude and morbid demeanor offensive and quickly exit the model, then plan their first haunt. During a dinner party, the Maitlands possess Charles, Delia, Otho, and their guests, Delia's art agent and his wife and daughter. Unexpectedly, their antics only amuse the group, inspiring Charles to pitch a supernatural theme park to investor Maxie Dean. The Dietzes uncover the town model in the attic. Additionally, Otho discovers the Maitlands' handbook and steals it. As a show of his power, Beetlejuice transforms into a giant snake and terrorizes the Dietzes before Barbara banishes him back into the town model. Juno summons Barbara and Adam back to the afterlife office and berates them for releasing Beetlejuice. Meanwhile, Lydia, depressed and blaming the Maitlands for Beetlejuice's attack, writes a suicide note. Lydia discovers Beetlejuice inside the model. In exchange for passage to the afterlife, she almost summons him, but the Maitlands return and stop her in time. Maxie Dean and his wife arrive, repeatedly requesting evidence of the paranormal occurrences, but the Maitlands refuse to remanifest for their amusement. Otho uses the handbook and conducts what he believes is a seance to force the Maitlands to show themselves. He uses Adam and Barbara's wedding clothes to summon them, but shortly after they materialize in their wedding clothes, they begin rapidly aging to the point of decomposition. Otho has instead mistakenly performed an exorcism on the Maitlands, which begins to send them to death for the dead. In a panic to save the Maitlands before it is too late, Lydia pleads with Beetlejuice, who offers a quid pro quo. He will rescue the Maitlands if Lydia agrees to marry him, which will allow him to permanently remain in the mortal world. Lydia reluctantly agrees and invokes his name 3 times. Beetlejuice saves the Maitlands, drives away the Deans and Otho, then prepares to wed Lydia. The Maitlands, slowly recovering from near exorcism, attempt to rebanish Beetlejuice to the model. In response, Beetlejuice beats them to the punch and banishes Adam to the town model, with Barbara sent to the desert land. Just before the wedding ceremony concludes, Barbara smashes through the ceiling of the house on the back of a sandworm, which devours Beetlejuice. The Dietzes and the Maitlands agree to harmoniously live together, and the Maitlands grow closer to Lydia. Beetlejuice is left in the afterlife waiting room, waiting his turn to see a caseworker. When he attempts to steal a witch doctor ghost's numbered ticket, the latter shrinks his head in retaliation. Cast: Michael Keaton as Beetlejuice, Alec Baldwin as Adam Maitland, Geena Davis as Barbara Maitland, Jeffrey Jones as Charles Dietz, Catherine O'Hara as Delia Dietz, Winona Ryder as Lydia Dietz, Sylvia Sidney as Juno, Robert Goulet as Maxie Dean, Dick Cavett as Bernard, Glenn Shadix as Otho Fenlock, Annie McEnroe as Jane Butterfield Sr., Simi Bo as Janitor, Marie Cheatham as Sarah Dean, Carmen Philpy as a run-over man employed as a messenger in the waiting room, Tony Cox as the preacher that Beetlejuice summons for his wedding with Lydia, Jack Angel as the voice of the preacher, Susan Kellerman as Grace, Adele Lutz as Beryl, Patrice Martinez as Miss Argentina, Rachel Middleman as Jane Butterfield Jr., Little Jane. Production, writing. After the financial success of Pee-wee's Big Adventure, 1985, Burton became a bankable director and began working on a script for Batman with Sam Hamm. While Warner Bros. Was willing to pay for the script's development, it was less willing to greenlight Batman. 7. Burton had become disheartened by the lack of imagination and originality in the scripts he had been sent, particularly Hot to Trot. Michael McDowell and Larry Wilson formed a partnership, Pecos Productions, with entertainment attorney Michael Bender, and Beetlejuice was their first original project. After developing the story, McDowell and Wilson decided they would write the first draft of the screenplay together, while Wilson would only take story-by credit, as well as his producer credit. Burton had gotten to know and worked with McDowell and Wilson, who co-wrote the script for The Jar, an episode of Alfred Hitchcock Presents that Burton directed. 7. Burton read their first draft of Beetlejuice, liked it, but had other projects that kept him from becoming involved at that time. The original script is far less comedic and much darker. The Maitlands' car crash is depicted graphically, with Barbara's arm crushed and the couple screaming for help as they slowly drown. A reference to this remains. Barbara remarks that her arm feels frozen upon returning home as a ghost. Instead of possessing the Dietzes and forcing them to dance during dinner, the Maitlands cause a vine-patterned carpet to come to life and attack them by tangling them to their chairs. The character of Beetlejuice, envisioned in the first draft as a winged demon who takes on the form of a short man, is also intent on killing the Dietzes rather than scaring them and wants sex from Lydia instead of marriage. In this version of the script, Beetlejuice need only be exhumed from his grave to be summoned, after which he is free to wreak havoc. He can be summoned, but not controlled, by saying his name 3 times and wanders the world freely, tormenting different characters in different manifestations. In another version of the script, the film concludes with the Maitlands, Dietzes, and Otho conducting an exorcism ritual that destroys Beetlejuice, and the Maitlands transforming into miniature versions of themselves and moving into Adam's model of their home, which they refurbished to look like their house before the Dietzes moved in. Co-author and producer Larry Wilson has talked about the reaction to the first draft by a prominent executive at Universal, where Wilson was employed at the time. I won't name names here, but I worked at Universal Studios at the time. I was director of development for the director Walter Hill. I had a very good relationship with a very prominent executive at Universal. He liked me and he liked what I was doing with Walter and the material I was bringing in. I gave him Beetlejuice to read, and I gave it to him on a Friday, and on Monday, his assistant called me and said, "Well, he wants to meet with you." My initial reaction was, wow, he'd read it. He must have loved it, or he wouldn't have wanted to see me so soon. But I went into his office, and he literally said, "What are you doing with your career? This piece of weirdness, this is what you're going to go out into the world with. You're developing into a very good executive. You've got great taste in material. Why are you going to squander all that for this piece of shit?" was basically what he was saying. It goes to show, right? Shortly after that, we sold it to the Geffen company. Scarron's rewrite shifted the film's tone, eliminating the graphic nature of the Maitlands' deaths and further developing the concept created by McDowell and Wilson that the afterlife is a complex bureaucracy. Scarron's rewrite also added to McDowell and Wilson's depiction of the limbo that keeps Barbara and Adam trapped inside their home. In the original script, it takes the form of a massive void filled with giant clock gears that shred the fabric of time and space as they move. Scarron had Barbara and Adam encounter different limbos every time they leave their home, including the clock world and the sandworm world, identified as Saturn's moon, Titan. Scarron also introduced the leitmotif of music accompanying Barbara and Adam's ghostly hijinks, although his script specified R&B tunes instead of Harry Belafonte, and was to have concluded with Lydia dancing to "When a Man Loves a Woman." Scarron's first draft retained some of McDowell's Beetlejuice's more sinister characteristics, but toned the character down to make him a troublesome pervert rather than blatantly murderous. Beetlejuice's true form was that of the Middle Eastern man, and much of his dialogue was written in African-American vernacular English. This version concluded with the Dietzes returning to New York and leaving Lydia in the care of the Maitlands, who, with Lydia's help, transformed their home's exterior into a stereotypical haunted house while returning the interior to its previous state. It also featured deleted scenes such as the real estate agent, Jane, trying to convince the Dietzes to allow her to sell the house for them, having sold it to them in the first place. Charles and Delia decline, and a revelation of how Beetlejuice had died centuries earlier. He attempted to hang himself while drunk, having been rejected by a woman, only to mess it up and die slowly by choking to death rather than quickly by snapping his neck, and wound up working for Juno before striking out on his own as a freelance bioexorcist. Retrospectively, McDowell was impressed with how many people made the connection between the film's title and the star Beetlejuice. Casting. Burton's original choice for Beetlejuice was Sammy Davis Jr. The producers also considered Dudley Moore and Sam Kinison for the role, but Geffen suggested Keaton. Burton was unfamiliar with Keaton's work, but was quickly convinced. Several actresses auditioned for the role of Lydia Dietz, including Sarah Jessica Parker, Brooke Shields, Lori Loughlin, Diane Lane, Justine Bateman, Molly Ringwald, Juliette Lewis, and Jennifer Connelly. Alyssa Milano was the runner-up for the role. Burton cast Ryder upon seeing her in Lucas. Angelica Houston was originally cast as Delia Dietz, but dropped out because of illness. O'Hara quickly signed on, while Burton claimed it took a lot of time to convince other cast members to sign, as they didn't know what to think of the weird script. Burton also felt that O'Hara and Jones would make a cute couple. Lydia Dietz was notably cast with the look and persona of the goth subculture. Filming. Beetlejuice's budget was $15 million, with just $1 million given over to visual effects work. Considering the scale and scope of the effects, which included stop motion, replacement animation, prosthetic makeup, puppetry, and blue screen, it was always Burton's intention to make the style similar to that of the B-movies he grew up with as a child. He said that he wanted to make the effects look cheap and purposely fake-looking. Burton wanted to hire Anton Furst as production designer after being impressed with his work on The Company of Wolves, 1984, and Full Metal Jacket, 1987, but Furst was committed to high spirits, a choice he later regretted. He hired Bo Welch, his future collaborator on Edward Scissorhands and Batman Returns. The test screenings were met with positive feedback and prompted Burton to film an epilogue featuring Beetlejuice foolishly angering a witch doctor. Warner Bros. Disliked the title Beetlejuice and wanted to call the film House Ghosts. As a joke, Burton suggested the name Scared Sheetless and was horrified when the studio actually considered using it. While the setting is the fictional village of Winter River, Connecticut, all outdoor scenes were filmed in East Corinth, a village in the town of Corinth, Vermont. Interiors were filmed at the Culver Studios in Culver City, California. Principal photography took place from March 11th to June 11th, 1987. Music. Main article, Beetlejuice soundtrack. The Beetlejuice soundtrack, first released in 1988 on LP, CD, and cassette tape, features most of the film's score, written and arranged by Danny Elfman. Geffen reissued the original 1988 soundtrack on vinyl in 2015, which was remastered and pressed to vinyl by Waxwork Records in 2019 for the film's 30th anniversary. The soundtrack features 2 original recordings performed by Harry Belafonte used in the film, Day-O, the Banana Boat song, and Jump in the Line, Shake Sonora. 2 other vintage Belafonte recordings that appear in the film are absent from the soundtrack, Man Smart, Woman Smarter, and Sweetheart from Venezuela. The soundtrack entered the Billboard 200 albums chart the week ending June 25, 1988, at number 145, peaking 2 weeks later at number 118 and spending a total of 6 weeks on the chart. This was after the film had already fallen out of the top 10 and before the video release in October. Day-O received a fair amount of airplay at the time in support of the soundtrack. The complete score, with the Belafonte tracks included, was released in both the DVD and the Blu-ray as an isolated music track in the audio settings menu. This version of the audio track consists entirely of clean musical cues, uninterrupted by dialogue or sound effects. Reception. Box office. Beetlejuice opened theatrically in the United States on March 30, 1988, earning $8,130,897 its opening weekend, which at the time was an Easter weekend record. The film eventually grossed $75.1 million worldwide. Beetlejuice was a financial success, recouping its $15 million budget and becoming the 10th highest-grossing film of 1988. Critical response. Beetlejuice was met with a mostly positive response. Based on 115 reviews collected by Rotten Tomatoes, Beetlejuice holds an 83% overall approval rating with an average rating of 7/10. The website's critical consensus reads, "Brilliantly bizarre and overflowing with ideas, Beetlejuice offers some of Michael Keaton's most deliciously manic work and creepy, funny fun for the whole family." On Metacritic, the film has a weighted average score of 71 out of 100, based on 19 reviews. Audiences surveyed by CinemaScore gave the film a B on a grade scale of A to F. Pauline Kael called the film a comedy classic. Jonathan Rosenbaum called it a creative mess in a positive review in the Chicago Reader. Desson Howe of the Washington Post felt Beetlejuice had the perfect balance of bizarreness, comedy, and horror. Janet Maslin of the New York Times gave the film a negative review, writing that the film tries anything and everything for effect and only occasionally manages something marginally funny and is about as funny as a shrunken head. Roger Ebert gave the film 2 out of 4 stars, writing that he would have been more interested if the screenplay had preserved their Alec Baldwin and Geena Davis sweet romanticism and cut back on the slapstick. Ebert called Keaton unrecognizable behind pounds of makeup and said his scenes don't seem to fit with the other action. In his book, Comedy Horror Films, A Chronological History, 1914-2008, Bruce G. Hallenbeck praised the film's lively script, assured direction, offbeat casting, and delightfully off-kilter, Edward Gorey-like look, citing the explorer with the shrunken head and the animated sandworm as particularly memorable visuals. Accolade. At the 61st Academy Awards, Beetlejuice won the Academy Award for Best Makeup, Steve Laporte, V. Neil, and Robert Short, while the British Academy of Film and Television Arts nominated the film for Best Visual Effects and Makeup at the 42nd British Academy Film Awards. Beetlejuice won Best Horror Film and Best Makeup at the 1988 Saturn Awards. Sydney also won the Saturn for Best Supporting Actress, and the film received 5 other nominations. Direction for Burton, writing for McDowell and Scarron, Best Supporting Actor for Keaton, music for Elfman, and special effects. Beetlejuice was nominated for the Hugo Award for Best Dramatic Presentation. Beetlejuice was 88th in the American Film Institute's list of best comedies. Sequel. Main article, Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice. A sequel, Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice. Produced by Brad Pitt's studio Plan B Entertainment alongside Warner Bros., with Michael Keaton, Winona Ryder, and Catherine O'Hara reprising their roles, was released in theaters on September 6, 2024. I know it's bananas that I've never seen Beetlejuice before, sitting down with the iconic 1988 movie to write this review. However, there is no better time to finally erase that huge, sandworm-sized hole in my personal horror canon than Gateway Horror Month here at Horror Press. For those who, like me, were unaware of the full machinations of the plot until now, here's a quick breakdown. Young couple Barbara, Geena Davis, and Adam Maitland, Alec Baldwin, have their staycation cut short when their car crashes into the river and they drown. Nothing will ruin your leisure time like dying horribly. Trapped as ghosts in their own home, they hire an untrustworthy bioexorcist named Beetlejuice, Michael Keaton, to rid them of their house's newest tenants. The rancid yuppie couple Charles, Jeffrey Jones, and Delia Dietz, Catherine O'Hara, who have brought along Charles's teenage daughter from a previous marriage, the gloriously goth Lydia, Winona Ryder. Does Beetlejuice hold up? Ultimately, there are two major ways that viewing Beetlejuice for the first time in 2024 can damage the experience. The first is the fact that some of the effects bringing the afterlife to, well, life, just don't gel with the story being told. Frankly, most of the effects don't hold up, but that doesn't really matter most of the time. Combining Tim Burton and co. His madcap designs with a chintzy theme park haunted house aesthetic provides an exuberant sensibility that does a lot to smooth over many of the flaws in the execution. However, certain moments, particularly any scenes set in the limbo zone, ruled by giant sandworms, look too tacky and undernourished to survive much scrutiny. The second issue, unfortunately, is much more insidious and tougher to integrate with the tone the movie wants to evoke. The title character is rape culture personified. There's hardly a line, gag, or flick of the eyes from Beetlejuice that isn't intensely uncomfortable on that level, to the point that I wonder how the upcoming sequel, which will probably scrub that element away in the wake of the #MeToo movement, will have anything left with which to characterize him. There are certainly ways to approach the character in context that mean you don't have to write off the movie entirely. It's a product of its time. Depiction does not equal endorsement, etc. Unfortunately, despite Michael Keaton's committed and energetic performance, the on-screen result is still something that I personally find deeply exhausting. The character is broad and sticky, complete with cartoon noises that go off basically every time he moves. It plays like a latter-era Jim Carrey, blended with the fourth best character from one of those Eddie Murphy movies in which he plays every part. Just like horror, comedy is one of the most subjective genres, but for this particular subject, the sheer amount of flop sweat from an ostensibly comic character turns the movie into a grimly unpleasant slog whenever he's on screen. There is one moment in the movie where Beetlejuice's head randomly begins to spin 360 degrees and scream, after which point he asks, "Don't you hate it when that happens?" where it clicked, and I finally got the sense of the casually ineffable Gene Wilder Willy Wonka-esque figure he was probably meant to be cutting this whole time. However, nothing after that came even close to matching that one perfect moment. Thankfully, the character is only in fewer than 20 minutes of the movie, but his irritating antics cast a pall over the whole experience, at least for this reviewer. Is Beetlejuice good gateway horror? Obviously, the Beetlejuice of it all is a huge demerit as far as Beetlejuice being good gateway horror for children to whom you want to deliver important lessons about how to, say, treat women. However, as a horror comedy in and of itself, the movie delivers solid gateway vibes. It doesn't skimp on a certain amount of intensity. I mean, this is a movie that kills off two of its main characters in the first 10 minutes, and also depicts the aftermath of a variety of grisly deaths. These deaths are presented in such a Tim Burtonified way that the stylization makes them somehow both gentler and more grotesque, which is perfect for gateway horror. It's like wandering through the aisles of a Halloween store, in the best way possible. On top of that, the movie is genuinely funny in many ways that don't even have anything to do with its ookier elements. For instance, there is a hilariously understated scene that doesn't call attention to itself whatsoever, where, quietly in the background, Charles thumbs through a magazine where a subscription card falls into his lap every time he turns a page. There are also huge comic set pieces here too, like the Day-O musical number that frankly mystified me, but certainly aims to delight rather than terrify. And obviously, if you get Catherine O'Hara within 2 miles of any screenplay, you know you're going to get a memorable comic line reading or 12. Should you watch or rewatch Beetlejuice? So, should you watch Beetlejuice? Especially now that the sequel Beetlejuice is on the horizon? Honestly, yes. I think my response to the movie represents the worst possible reaction any horror fan could have to it, and I still enjoyed it a great deal. So there's a lot of room for people to like it a hell of a lot more than me. Plus, even setting aside literally everything about the afterlife and Beetlejuice himself, the movie has got miles and miles of effortless, delectable, exquisite style. Never has the real world felt just as dazzling and eye-popping as the realm of the supernatural. Everything Delia wears on her face, head, and body is worth pausing the movie to pore over in detail. Lydia has nearly the same hit rate, and the movie itself reacts to her with sublime reverence, literally having her carried into the frame in her introduction, and at one point supplying her with her own in-universe fog machine for a pivotal moment. The house itself is also a glorious bit of design, evoking a childhood fantasy of a small-town home full of knobby bits shooting off into nowhere and architectural structures that simultaneously make no sense and fit in perfectly. The filmmaking itself is also dazzling and creative, whether you're getting a fly-on-the-wall perspective that is then revealed to be a literal fly, or seeing the Maitlands digging through a life-sized model cemetery complete with faux grass and particle board. This is a movie that is immaculately designed to within an inch of its life and beyond. And with Tim Burton at the helm, at the height of his powers, it is a scrumptious sight to behold. Beetlejuice Review. When I was invited to see Beetlejuice, I was intrigued, given just how much social legacy the first film Beetlejuice had. But then, as I sat there thinking about the original movie, it dawned on me. I had watched it, right? But for the life of me, I could not remember if I had actually watched it. Or was it one of those films that you have just absorbed through the osmosis of the decades? Well, there is only one way to fix a dilemma like that, and that is to remove all doubt. So, to set the scene, we open as Adam Maitland, Alec Baldwin, plays with his model town as he and his wife Barbara, Geena Davis, holiday at their holiday home. It is a beautiful time for all, right up until they swerve to miss a dog and are killed in the crash, not that they know they are dead for a while. They try to find purpose in the afterlife, but that is shattered when a new family, Charles, Jeffrey Jones, Delia, Catherine O'Hara, and Lydia Dietz, Winona Ryder, arrives. They want to change everything, but there might be hope when the daughter catches a glimpse of the couple looking from a window. But when they can't get anyone to leave, they do something everyone was warned against. They say, "Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice," Michael Keaton. While this was a film made in the 80s, it was a pleasant surprise to see just how much of it still holds up today. Part of that was, of course, its reliance on practical effects, stop motion, and prosthetics work that tends to hold up a bit better over time. Now, that is not to say that everything still looked fresh, with a couple of moments standing out more than a penguin in the Sahara, but the film is almost 40 years old, so you do have to cut it some slack. Indeed, the whole production side of this film is a delight. I loved all the sets they built when we jumped down into the model world. To add to this, Danny Elfman's musical score was a wonderful combination of fun and off-putting, and I loved how he built the theme up in layers to achieve that off-kilter feel. Then we have the cast, who are just having a blast on screen. Alec Baldwin and Geena Davis make a great double act as the recently deceased Maitlands, and they do an excellent job of making you sympathetic to the dead. The Dietz are not the worst people you have ever met, but they are just obnoxious, which makes a good counterpoint for the narrative. Winona Ryder does become the moral center of the film as it progresses, and I think that was the right choice. The big surprise for me was how little Beetlejuice is actually in the movie, with him only getting two big sequences, though he floats around in the margins for a lot of the proceedings. Whatever the case, Michael Keaton chews every bit of scenery that he can get his hands on. Watching him switch streams 180 degrees in the middle of a scene is so jarring, yet apt for the character he was playing. Where I am not sure if the film has held up over the years comes down to more of the narrative and themes more than anything else. The narrative itself is straightforward in such a way that there is a rigidity here that I was not expecting. However, that was more interesting than anything else. But more than this, there was an uncomfortable glibness around parts of death, including the mannerisms of said deaths, which sometimes you understand why it is played for laughs. Yet other times, it feels macabre, even in a film like this. In the end, do we recommend Beetlejuice? Yes, we would. Some parts have not aged all that well, but that is to be expected with a 40-year-old film. But if nothing else, it was fascinating to watch a movie that has clearly been influential across the genre ever since its release. If you liked Beetlejuice, we would recommend to you Ready or Not. Tim Burton's 1988 dark fantasy Beetlejuice fascinated and terrified me growing up. The ghost with the shrunken head in particular left a nightmarish imprint under my pillow. But like many of Burton's works, Beetlejuice is a ghoulish, zany fever dream in the guise of a family film. With the long-awaited sequel hitting theaters in September, it felt like the perfect time to revisit Burton's bizarre mind. After newlyweds Barbara, Geena Davis, and Adam Maitland, Alec Baldwin, die in a car accident, they find themselves stuck haunting their New England farmhouse. When they try and fail to scare away the insufferable new owners, the Deets, Catherine O'Hara and Jeffrey Jones, and their teenage daughter Lydia, Winona Ryder of Stranger Things, they enlist the rambunctious spirit Beetlejuice, Michael Keaton of Batman 1989, whose help only brings chaos. Not much about the film makes sense. Beetlejuice plays more like a stream of haphazard ideas than a well-conceived narrative, but its brisk pace works in its favor. It doesn't give us time to digest its quirks, and we're rather pushed to embrace them. Once the Maitlands make sense of their dire fate, they travel to the afterlife's waiting room, a supernatural realm inhabited by distressed souls. Some of the film's best moments take place in this waiting room, where we meet various other spirits whose appearances indicate grisly deaths, including a sawed-in-half magician's assistant, a charred man having a smoke, and a diver with the shark that killed him still chomping on his leg. Cartoon-like makeup and puppetry only bolster Burton's darkly whimsical style, and the look of this place is bizarre, like a warped bank vestibule with willow trees spiraling from the ground. A grim detail I hadn't noticed when watching Beetlejuice as a preteen was that those who committed suicide became civil servants in the afterlife. The receptionist, Miss Argentina 1939, reveals she slit her wrists. A man hanging from a noose delivers mail to desks, and Juno, the Maitland's caseworker, blows cigarette smoke out of her sliced throat. Unable to frighten the Deetses alone, the Maitlands contact foul-mouthed ghost Beetlejuice, spelled Betelgeuse in the film, to aid them. Keaton brings a vivacity to the role that makes Beetlejuice feel otherworldly and dangerous while still imbecilic and humorous, often taunting the couple and making crude remarks. While his presence can sometimes feel ill-suited to the narrative, Beetlejuice breathes life into this haunted house tale. Beetlejuice is indeed a haunted house tale, but in reverse, where instead the humans are the annoyance we want to exorcise from the house. Dahlia and Charles Dietz and their friend Otho are too preoccupied with turning the Maitlands' house into a new wave work of art to notice the existence of ghosts. Their daughter Lydia, however, is drawn to the macabre, quickly befriending Barbara and Adam. A lot of the story revolves around Lydia's coming of age. Behind her gothic veil, Lydia feels isolated among her egotist parents, who often dismiss her intellect and melancholia. Despite Delia and Charles's indifference, Lydia is unafraid to be herself, finding comfort in the Maitlands, whose friendship helps her realize life doesn't have to be as mundane as death. Beetlejuice is an inventive illustration of Burton's personality, with Keaton's transformative turn as the titular character bringing spunk to this snappy horror comedy. This is a digitized version of an article from the Times' print archive before the start of online publication in 1996. To preserve these articles as they originally appeared, the Times does not alter, edit, or update them. Occasionally, the digitization process introduces transcription errors or other problems. We are continuing to work to improve these archived versions. Anyone whose idea of high wit can be achieved with bizarre latex facial makeup and extra eyeballs in unexpected places will at least admire Beetlejuice for its ingenuity. Tim Burton, who also directed Pee-wee's Big Adventure, shows a keen grasp of pre-adolescent tastes in special effects, the weirder the better. Pacing, illogical but busy, and comic constructs, only something incongruous, like people breaking into the Banana Boat song, Deo, for no reason, is funnier than something rude. But for other audiences, Beetlejuice, which opens today at the Criterion Center and other theaters, is about as funny as a shrunken head, and it happens to include a few. The big joke here is death, since the film's principals are a cute young couple named Adam, Alec Baldwin, and Barbara, Geena Davis, who are killed as the story begins. These two immediately return as ghosts, but Topper, this isn't. Sophisticated spirit world humor is hardly the order of the day. So dim are Adam and Barbara that he has trouble reading properly, and they both require about 20 minutes worth of not finding their reflections in mirrors to realize they're not precisely in the pink. Adam and Barbara are horrified to find their rustic house sold to a group of fey, obnoxious New Yorkers who are a great deal more ghoulish than the ghosts themselves, and so they do what they can to haunt the place and scare the new owners away. They try severing their heads and so forth, but when the new owners shriek, it's only over the lack of closet space. Into the midst of this standoff rides Michael Keaton as the title character, a bio-exorcist, who emerges from the grave determined to appall everyone as much as he possibly can. He does this much too well. Elaborate as this sounds, there really isn't much plot here, only a parade of arbitrary visual tricks to hold the film together. Mr. Keaton, for instance, appears in one scene with a tiny carousel atop his head, bat wings coming out of his ears, and huge inflatable arms that turn into mallets. At another point, when asked if he can be scary, he sprouts Medusa-like snakes atop his head. And when he spins his head in another scene, he complains, "Don't you hate it when that happens?" Beetlejuice is the kind of movie that's hard to believe wasn't made earlier than it was, or at least as effectively. It's such a clever premise. A recently deceased couple must haunt their home to try and scare off its new inhabitants. God damn it, that's good. I revisited it for the first time since childhood last year and was stunned by how well it holds up. It's funny, creative, colorful, energetic, and delightfully morbid. The cast all shows up, particularly Geena Davis, Winona Ryder, and Catherine O'Hara. The production design by Bo Welch is lively. I swear I don't mean to do this. And cheeky. The cinematography by Thomas E. Ackerman is evocative of Looney Tunes and Italian horror cinema. Danny Elfman's score and accompanying soundtrack strike a perfect off-horror tone, and Burton is clearly having a ball. His imagination has never been so clearly represented, yet coherent before or since. Freeman, you blithering dipshit, you didn't even mention Michael Keaton's transformative turn as the titular Beetlejuice. The fuck? He's great. But going back to Winona Ryder's character for a paragraph, let's talk about Lydia Dietz. I love this character. Acerbically weary to the world well beyond her years, fascinated with death and the afterlife, I can only assume the character is an analog for a teenage Burton. Recently, I showed some friends the first pages of a script I'm working on, and one of them asked, "Does everything you write have a character that could be played by Winona Ryder in Beetlejuice?" The answer is yes, though not intentionally. Like many millennials, I watched this movie a bunch as a kid, and clearly it made an impact. After this and Michael Lehmann's Heathers, 1988, made the then 17-year-old Ryder a star, and for good reason. She was, and is, don't get me wrong, immediately iconic. But I'm convinced the shot that made her a superstar is in this movie. It is, in fact, her introduction. As the Dietz family moves into the house, two helpers deliver a couch inside. Sitting upon this couch, decked out in all black and casually gripping a Polaroid camera, which will serve as an important plot device later, is Lydia. The shot is composed perfectly, a tilt that takes the audience a second to register just what and or who they're looking at. The costuming by Aggie Garrard Rogers immediately elicits a laugh because of just how much black clothing she piles on to a human, and Ryder plays it perfectly. Unimpressed but curious and teen tragic, we are simultaneously endeared and alienated to and by this character, a perfect visual introduction. This is just one example of maybe Beetlejuice's greatest strength, its characters. Burton has made better movies than this, but few as memorable. Geena Davis shines as our endlessly earnest and practical heroine, Barbara Maitland. She is overwhelmed by the mortal shift her life has taken, but is determined to conquer it, innocently tapping into her more mischievous and devious side in the process. Davis believes in Barbara's plight, so we believe in Barbara's plight. On the other hand, there's Catherine O'Hara, who steals every scrap of celluloid she's on, as she always does, with her turn as Lydia's stepmom, Delia Dietz. A vague New Age art type, she's committed to her charitably gonzo craft and winds up in increasingly insane outfits, por ejemplo, a glove hat and sweater pants, and making increasingly deranged sculptures. That could be all there was to her, but O'Hara plays it so boisterous and acidic and clueless and pathetic and ultimately sympathetic. As impactful as the character of Lydia was for me, Delia is my favorite hands down. And then there's Beetlejuice, the ghost with the most. Michael Keaton deserves every shred of credit he gets for his crafting of the titular phantasmagoric sleazeball. It is a performance so good, so fully realized, any imitators or wannabes can't help but pale in comparison. He's also indicative of Beetlejuice's primary, nearly fatal flaw. The third act is an unmitigated disaster. I would argue that in the comedy genre, you can't find a better first two-thirds of a movie than Beetlejuice. It is always bringing something new to the table, with endlessly likable characters discovering an endlessly interesting new world. And representative of the fun, spooky chaos is Keaton. He only has about 15 minutes of screen time, with at least half of it reserved for the climax. I don't know if such limited screen time is to be credited for the character's success. I don't think so. Beetlejuice is a fascinating, repulsive little creep, and Keaton is so damn watchable in the part. There isn't really another character like him. But come the third act, he introduces a boatload of underdeveloped, out-of-nowhere rules that hijack and dictate the film's climax. It's been leading to this. His presence is a malevolent, anticipatory one, but it feels contrived. Suddenly, there's a wedding, and our heroes, the Maitlands, are shunted to the background as Beetlejuice mugs and dances until they stop him. It could have been pulled off, his sudden appearance forcing the Maitlands and the Dietzes to work together to stop him, but there's no cohesion to it. From what I understand, the script, credited in the final film to Michael McDowell and Larry Wilson, was originally much darker. What was conceived as an R-rated horror comedy was warped and twisted into a PG, mostly family-friendly spooky comedy. Couple this with Burton's notorious inability to stick a landing, and the mess that is Beetlejuice's last act makes sense. And what we get is serviceable. It's meaningless eye candy, feeling like a bunch of gags and visuals they couldn't fit into the film elsewhere, all piled up on each other. And the last 4 minutes are perfect. But what came before deserved better. The climax isn't the only problem. There's a lot dialogue that feels random and out of place. It's inconsistent with its own universe's rules, and Burton will always spring for style over substance. But these qualms are easily forgivable. They all feed into the macabre joy of Beetlejuice. It's messy by design, but excels in its strengths far past its weaknesses. With the release of Beetlejuice, it may be a good idea to watch or rewatch the original to get ready for the sequel. Released in 1988, Beetlejuice has been a fan favorite for generations, with more people gravitating to the work of director Tim Burton, and the performances from Geena Davis, Alec Baldwin, Winona Ryder, Catherine O'Hara, and of course, Michael Keaton as the ghost with the most. Beetlejuice in 4K Ultra HD is available to watch on Max, or to buy digitally on sale for $7.99, Red $14.99, or rent for $3.79 on Prime Video. The movie is also available on Apple TV. Beetlejuice in 4K Ultra HD is available to watch on Max, or to buy digitally on sale for $7.99.99, or rent for $3.79 on Prime Video. The movie is also available on Apple TV, Beetlejuice foolishly angering a witch doctor. Warner Bros. Disliked the title, Beetlejuice, and wanted to call the film House Ghosts as a joke. Burton suggested. The name scared Sheetless, and was horrified when the studio actually considered using it, while the setting is the fictional village of Winter River, Connecticut. All outdoor scenes were filmed in East Corinth. A village in the town of Corinth, Vermont interiors were filmed at the Culver Studios in Culver City, California. Principal photography took place from March 11th to June 11th. 1987 soundtrack. The Beetlejuice soundtrack, first released in 1988 on LP, CD, and cassette tape, features most of the film's score, written and arranged by Danny Elfman. Geffen reissued the original 1988 soundtrack on vinyl in 2015, which was remastered and pressed to vinyl by Waxwork Records in 2019 for the film's 30th anniversary. The soundtrack features 2 original recordings performed by Harry Belafonte, used in the Film Dio the Banana Boat song and Jump in the Line, Shake Sonora. 2 other vintage Belafonte recordings that appear in the film are absent from the soundtrack: Man Smart, Woman Smarter, and Sweetheart from Venezuela. The soundtrack entered the Billboard 200 albums chart the week ending June 25, 1988 at no 145, paying 2 weeks later at no 118, and spending a total of 6 weeks on the chart. This was after the film had already fallen out of the top 10, and before the video release in October Day, received a fair amount of airplay at the time in support of the soundtrack. The complete score, with the B-Ant tracks included, was released in both the DVD and the Blu-ray as an isolated music track in the audio settings menu. This version of Light, the audio track, consists entirely of clean musical cues, uninterrupted by dialogue or sound effects. Box office. Beetlejuice opened theatrically in the United States on March 30th, 1988, earning $18,397 its opening weekend. The film eventually grossed $746,64632 in North America. Beetlejuice was a financial success, recouping its $115 million budget and the 10th highest grossing film of 1988. Critical response. Beetlejuice was met with a mostly positive response based on 62 reviews collected by Rotten Tomatoes. Beetlejuice received an 85% overall approval rating with a weighted average of 72/10. The website's critical consensus reads brilliantly bizarre and overflowing with ideas. Beetlejuice offers some of Michael Keaton's most deliciously manic work and creepy funny fun for the whole family. On Metacritic, the film has a weighted average score of 70 out of 100 based on 18 reviews. Audiences surveyed by CinemaScore gave the film a B on a grade scale of A to F. Paul and Kale called the film a comedy classic, while Jonathan Rosenbaum of Chicago Reader gave a highly positive review. Rosenbaum felt Beetlejuice had originality and creativity absent from other films. Vincent Canby of the New York Times called it a farce for our time and wished Keaton had more screen time. Decent Howe of the Washington Post felt Beetlejuice had the perfect balance of bizarres, comedy, and horror. Janet Masson of the New York Times gave the film a negative review, writing that the film tries anything and everything for effect, and only occasionally manages something marginally funny, and is about as funny as a shrunken head. Roger Ebert gave the film 2 out of 4 stars, writing that he would have been more interested if the screenplay had preserved their Alec Baldwin and Geena Davis sweet romanticism and cut back on the slapstick eert. Called Keaton unrecognizable behind pounds of makeup, and said his scenes don't seem to fit with the other action in his book. Comedy horror films. A chronological history. 1914-2008. Bruce G. Hollenbeck praised the film's lively, script-assured, direction-offbeat casting, and delightfully off-kilter Edward Gorey like look, citing The Explorer with the shrunken head and the animated sandworm as particularly memorable visuals. Accolades at the 61st Academy Awards. Beetlejuice won the Academy Award for Best Makeup. Steve Leort, V. Neal, and Robert Short, while the British Academy of Film and Television Arts nominated the film for Best Visual Effects and Makeup at the 42nd British Academy Film Awards. Beetlejuice won Best Horror Film and Best Makeup at the 1988 Saturn Awards. Sydney also won the Saturn for Best Supporting Actress, and the film received 5 other nominations. Direction for Burton, writing for McDowell and Scarron. Best Supporting Actor for Keaton music for Elfman and special effects, Beetlejuice was nominated for. The Hugo Award for Best Dramatic Presentation. Beetlejuice was 88th in the American Film Institute's list of best comedies. A sequel, Beetlejuice. Beetlejuice, produced by Brad Pitt's studio Plan B Entertainment alongside Warner Bros. With Michael Keaton, Winona Ryder, and Catherine O'Hara reprising their roles, is scheduled for release on September 6th, 2024. Beetlejuice movie review. Beetlejuice gets off to a start that's so charming it never lives it down. The movie is all anticlimax. Once we realize Better yet, from this freak of a character named Beetlejuice that lives in the graveyard that's part of the miniature tabletop town that Baldwin built in the script from a story by Michael McDowell and Larry Wilson. Things above ground aren't nearly as inventive as they are below. Luckily, Keaton pops up from his grave to liven things up when the antics pitting the good ghosts against the intruders become a trite cat and mouse game. Beetlejuice is the epitome of Tim Burton's art and one of his best films, with his second feature working from a screenplay by Michael McDowell and Warren Scarron Burton, essentially established the mode that has dominated his work ever since. A mix of satire, black comedy, gothicism, horror, expressionism, and camp, the movie also displays Burton's crowning weakness and inability to sustain and develop a narrative. Simply put, the story is not the strong point of Beetlejuice. Sure, the premise is undeniably novel. When a nice couple, Alec Baldwin and Geena Davis, die and become ghosts, they enlist the help of the crazy bio-exorcist Beetlejuice Michael Keaton in order to scare the insufferable new residents, Jeffrey Jones and Catherine O'Hara, out of their house. But that premise is pure, high-concept, succinct, and interesting, but designed more to generate humorous situations and entertaining set pieces than to tell an involving story or create well-developed characters. This goes to show that Tim Burton has always been a commercially savvy and very Hollywood filmmaker in Beetlejuice. However, the insubstantial story adds to the film's manic and frenetically imaginative tone, which is one of its most appealing qualities. The worlds Burton creates in his films tend to feel as though they've been made on the fly, that they're at the whim of Burton's every fancy. For example, in Beetlejuice, Burton gives us an inexplicable yet arresting vision of sandworms on one of the moons of Saturn just outside the door. If the ghosts leave their home, in this sense, Beetlejuice seems like it sprung from the mind of a slightly deranged yet brilliant boy. Burton's imagination was still a flame burning strongly, if strangely this is before his style, solidified into a kind of weird brand to be stamped onto conventional narratives, as in the case of Burton's Tired Alice. In Wonderland, for all my talk about Burton, though it is really Michael Keaton who makes this movie of lasting appeal, I think Keaton's Beetlejuice, pronounced Beetlejuice, is the best Burton ever put on screen, surpassing anything Johnny Depp has ever done for him, with wild, dirty green hair, shadowy eye sockets, and sickly marks along the side of his head and neck. Beetlejuice is memorable just to look at, but Keaton's performance nails it. He makes his dead weirdo never stop shifting and moving, jerkily, bugging his eyes and licking his lips, always trying to wheedle a deal with people in an aggressive, pushy used car salesman sort of way. Like Anthony Hopkins, Hannibal Lecter in The Silence of the LS, Keaton's Beetlejuice is the star of the movie, despite his limited screen time, and like in Lambs, the rest of the film builds up Keaton's performance, since everyone spends a great deal of time talking about the character. When he's not around his main entrance, the camera hides him when he's reading the paper during his first scene, and we only see him head-on a television screen. Before this moment is one of those great on-screen flights of manic energy. It reminds me of when Robin Williams first gets on the air in Good Morning Vietnam, or when his genie busts out of the lamp in Aladdin. Expect that. Keaton's Beetlejuice is much more vile and perverted than anything Robin Williams did in those movies. Keaton's performance also puts the lie to the idea that the much-touted Birdman parallels Keaton's career, for Keaton had a successful comedic career before and after Batman. The rest of the cast is exceptional, creating a collection of memorable, humorous types. Alec Baldwin and Geena Davis make the nice ghost couple. Adam and Barbara make Emland endearing and just a little quirky, when the characters could easily have been forgettable. Jeffrey Jones and Catherine O'Hara are also great as the insufferable new residents. Charles and Dea Dietz Jones makes his New York real. Estate magnate, both likable in his efforts to find some peace and quiet in New England, and annoying in his money grubbing real estate schemes. O'Hara's stepmother, with her hideous, trendy taste and an intense desperation to show off to her arts urban friends again, achieves the fine line of irritation at first and understanding. Eventually, we know her writer is Lydia Dietz, the gothic teenage daughter who is able to see the ghosts, the weird outsider with insight. She's sort of the quintessential Tim Burton child character, but Lydia thankfully doesn't escape the film's satiric barbs. Lastly, Glenn Shadex makes Aodea's artsy knit all-consultant into yet another funny, vivid, if not fully three-dimensional character. It is to the film's testament that scenes such as the man's in the underworld or the dinner party possessed dance are great fun, even if the brilliant Beetlejuice isn't in them. In fact, the only weak aspect of this film might be the underdeveloped story. Ed Wood has greater emotional depth, and Sleepy Hollow has more impressive mise-en-scene, but almost every feature Burton's made since Beetlejuice resembles it in one way or another. But if it's Burton's touchstone, it's also the high point of Michael Keaton's career. More details. Beetlejuice, a film directed by Tim Burton, Alice in Wonderland, was released to the public on March 30th, 1988. It was released with a PG rating. This would be quite different by today's standards. The film main characters, Barbara Maitland, Geena Davis, and Adam, manned Alec Baldwin in a car crash and then become ghosts trapped in their own house. When the Dietz family, Lydia Charles and Delia, buy their house, they am away, and they enlist the help of Beetlejuice, Michael Keaton. Lydia Winona Ryder is the only one who can see the ghosts of Barbara and Adam because she is strange and unusual. This causes Adam and Barbara to create a bond with Lydia, taking her under their wings and treating her like their own daughter. When Lydia tries to tell her father, Charles Jeffrey Jones, and Dea Catherine O'Hara about the ghosts they tell her, she is crazy and chaos ensues as the man try to scare them out of the house. Michael Keaton does a wonderful job embodying the ghost. His portrayal of this character is funny and enjoyable, from the way he changes his voice for this character to his comedic delivery. Michael Keaton overall brings a layer of fun to his performance and seems like he is having the time of his life in this film. In addition, Geena Davis's portrait, Trail of Barbara Mond, conveys well the extent to which Barbara and Adam want of that child of their own. This is best shown through their regrets of not spending their lives to the fullest and taking Lydia and almost treating her as if she is their own. Catherine O'Hara, Delia, does an excellent job portraying her character as zany and creative. O'Hara has perfect comedic timing in Deo the Banana Boat song. In addition to this, Jeffrey Jones Charles does an excellent job playing his character by embodying how he just wants to relax, and his family is not letting him Winona Ryder. Lydia gives an enjoyable performance as a strange and dejected team, I would say. That overall, there is great acting in this movie. One of my favorite parts of the movie is when Barbara and Adam go to the netherworld and get hit with the shocking realization that they cannot have their house to themselves and must scare the new family out of their house. But there are some uncomfortable moments in the film where I would caution viewers who do not like the idea of people getting married against their will. Also, sexual references would make this unsuitable for children. I would recommend ages 13 and older. By today's standard, the rating would land more towards a PG-13 or R rating, since Beetlejuice for vulgar language and Beetlejuice's inappropriate behavior towards Barbara. In retrospect, we can see the cultural relevance the film holds. While it is brilliantly funny, some may say that from today's perspective, the effects are severely outdated. An animated series was made after the movie's success. We know that today they are currently working on Beetlejuice 2. Most of the creative team is back for it, like Lydia Winona Ryder, who is now known for Stranger Things, and Michael Keaton, who most recently appeared in Spider-Man: Homecoming as the Vulture. Also, it spawned a musical adaptation, which I went to see. There are some differences between the musical adaptation and the film. The musical focuses on Lydia's feelings after her mother dies and how she calls on Beetlejuice to help her. And instead of the Matlins dying in a car crash, they die by falling through an unstable floorboard. Also, Beetlejuice has more of a role in the musical adaptation. As in the movie, he only appeared for 30 minutes. He is present for the whole runtime of the musical. One more difference to note is that Lydia and her father Charles go to the netherworld. All aspects, besides the ones mentioned above, are the same in the musical adaptation, with the rare exception little in cinema history prepared audiences for the sheer lunacy that was Beetlejuice, a film that clicked with them at just the right moment becoming a wild success in the process. Director Tim Burton's mind is a very unusual place, and it's filled with some fantastic and inventive premises. Beetlejuice was his earliest project, built on a massive scale hot off the success of Pee-wee's Big Adventure. Burton brought audiences into his imagination, where he envisioned an old three-story house on a hill in a sleepy New England town where nothing unusual seems to happen until the accidental death of the Maitlands, Adam Alec Baldwin and Barbara Geena Davis. They travel to the afterlife, where they meet a wide array of dead folks, all of whom have died in unusual circumstances. The Manns find themselves trapped as ghosts in their former home, as it's sold off to the Dietz family, an avant-garde bunch led by Jeffrey Jones and Catherine O'Hara, with Winona Ryder as Ba. Their teenage daughter, Lydia Michael Keaton, plays the titular Beetlejuice, pronounced like the title, but spelled like the star adenosine of the afterlife that sells himself to the Monde as a bio-exorcist. Despite warnings from his former mentor, Juno Sylvia Sidney, they agree to engage his services, which culminates in a hilarious dinner table sequence that stands out as the best of the film's many terrific gags. Apart from Jones, Keaton, and Sidney, much of the cast were recently emerged into the public consciousness and springboarded from this film into greater things. Davis would go on to win an Oscar, and Baldwin and Ryder would pick up nominations. Keaton was already a star, so anchoring this film only solidified his position as a prominent box office figure, cemented the following year in Burton's Batman. He would also later earn an Oscar nomination for a role modeled off his post-Batman years. Sidney was a star of the silver screen, and her performance is a perfect one, as can easily be said of the rest of the cast. Even guest stars, Robert Guay and Dick Cavett, provided brilliant support. Much of what would become the Burton aesthetic came to prominence with this film. The dark Gothic foundation bolstered by bright, vibrant colors, with strange yet relatable figures populating it. This was a style that had some roots in David Lynch, The Elephant Man, and Terry Gilliam, Brazil, but which managed to fuse with the mainstream just enough to become desired commodities well into the 1990s. Burton became far too dependent on his style eventually, but for a time he was riding high thanks to his successes here. And with Pee-wee, the production design draws inspiration from early horror films, especially German expressionist films like Nosferatu, while adding in references and taking notes from B-movies of the 1960s to give this brazen and inventive design style added punctuation. Burton brought in Dead Man's Party songwriter Oingo Boingo frontman Danny Elfman, who would become a consistent force behind Burton's films. This film marked one of his best contributions of music. Those C collaborations. Beetlejuice is an experience that has to be felt to be understood, having seen it in theaters originally and many times on TV after. That feeling persists. It's a film that can sometimes feel quite dated. Even then, there's still a lot of fun to be had. This film, directed by Tim Burton. Screenplay by Michael McDowell, Warren Scar. Story by Michael McD. Larry Wilson, produced by Michael Bender. Larry Wilson, Richard Hashimoto, starring Alec Baldwin, Geena Davis, Jeffrey Jones, Catherine O'Hara, Winona Ryder, Michael Keaton. Cinematography, Thomas E. Acrian, edited by Jane Curson, music by Danny Elfman. Production company, The Geffen Company, distributed by Warner Bros. Release date, 9/88, running time, 92 minutes. Country, United States language. English budget, $115 million, box office, $7 million. So, guys, this is the review of Beetlejuice movie and some information about it. How do you like our today's video? Please let us know by commenting. And if you like this video, please like it, share it, and don't